Welcome to the Paradigm Shift on 4ZZZ 102.1, where we challenge the assumptions of our current society to resist oppression and investigate alternative ways of living, for a world based on justice, solidarity and sustainability. Welcome to the Paradigm Shift on 4ZZZ 102.1 FM. That is your local community radio station. My name is Andy and I will be with you for the next hour, broadcasting on Yagara and Turrbal country. And today on the show, it is a second part of a two-part series about Queensland's new censorship laws, to do with a couple of phrases which may reference the struggle of Palestinian people against Israeli occupation and oppression. We are going to speak to Remah Naji from Justice For Palestine Magandjin about the laws themselves and also about the weekend of action that is planned over the next 3 days of resistance to these laws. And it does seem like there's a lot of interest in it and a lot of people will be getting involved in trying to resist these laws. So we'll hear all about that from Remah, and also about the process of the laws coming in. One of the things that just amazes me in the course of that interview is that the government made no attempt to reach out to Justice for Palestine to ask for any input of any kind about these laws. And in fact, when the group made a submission, which anybody in the public is allowed to do, to make a submission to the parliamentary process of approving the laws, and then a number of submissions get asked to speak at a hearing, that Justice for Palestine, even though they requested that they would be able to speak at the hearing, they weren't allowed to do that either, which is just amazing that they didn't think that they needed to ask what the phrases meant, what was intended, what the context, historical origin of these phrases, anything like that. But it says a lot. And then in the second part of the show, we'll hear from a father-son combo who have both run into a bit of trouble for these new laws. We'll hear from Jim Dowling, who was one of the first people arrested. We did last week on the show speak to Liam Parry, who was the first person arrested, and Jim as well got arrested for holding a sign outside of Boeing, one of the world's biggest weapons manufacturers, their office in the city, and his sign it referenced Boeing, the weapons company, did not reference Palestine, as we'll hear. But yes, he was arrested and was in court this week. And then we'll hear from Franz Dowling, who had his house raided, a dawn raid by the anti-terror squad for daring to hang a banner with the words that must not be said on the side of the house. And so we will hear the story of that as well. So stick around. If you aren't familiar with the context, along a lot of anti-protest laws that have been brought through in recent years, of all kinds of anti-protest laws, and then more recently there's been a lot of sort of attempts to shut down the consistent protests for Palestine that have been happening in this country. And of course there was a tragic incident of anti-Semitic violence, a horrific massacre that took place late last year, which the people did not yell these phrases, but that was taken as impetus to bring in a law that represses freedom of speech. It doesn't do much else. It says that these two phrases, one of which I'll even though for journalistic purposes you can say the phrases that is written in the law, that if it has educational purposes you can. Triple Z's history with the law means I'll take no chances here, but the phrases, one of them is very commonly known. It refers to a space of land, which happens to be the land of Palestine, between a river on one side and a sea on the other, that in that space of land, Palestinian people should be free. That is the phrase in its totality. And the second one is about an Arabic word for rebellion or shaking off. It's also a historical incident, like there's been 2 intifadas of Palestinian rebellion against Israel historically, not since the 1990s. But the notion of that being spread around the world is the other prohibited phrase, which, as we'll hear in the interview, I've never heard it said at a rally or by anybody. But anyway, so those laws were banned by the Queensland Liberal government, of course, with no Senate in this state. It's very easy to just pass a law if you have the majority in Parliament, which they did. And that's it. The laws carry a maximum penalty of 2 years in prison. To hear more about it, let's hear from Remah Naji.
My name is Remah Naji. I'm a spokesperson for Justice for Palestine Magandjin.
And today we're talking about Queensland's new laws, which of course have some relevance to Justice for Palestine Magandjin. So to start off with, I wonder if you can just tell us, from the point of view of a Palestinian person and an organisation supporting Palestinian rights, what are your thoughts on these laws?
I think they're discriminatory in nature. The fact that we Palestinians are assumed to be, if we call for the liberation of our people, if we call for our people to be free from apartheid and occupation, we are somehow trying to attack a particular community. And here I mean the Jewish community. I think this is discriminatory in nature, and it's accusing us of not even being able to advocate for equal rights for our own people when they are being massacred and slaughtered. And I say that as a Palestinian woman, I stand with the Jewish community against all forms of racism. There is no amount of propaganda that will change my position. However, to try and stop me from advocating for equal rights and freedom from apartheid and freedom from illegal occupation, this is absurd. And there is no amount of laws that's going to stop Palestinians and people who are supporting Palestinians after what we've been exposed to over the past few years. There's no amount of laws that's going to stop us from advocating for equal rights and freedoms for the people of Palestine.
I guess for the average person who hasn't been following this but sees in the news that these phrases, which seem kind of innocuous, have been banned, they maybe assume that there's some kind of coded message hidden in these phrases that means that they are dangerous. So, is that the case, that there's more to these phrases than it seems?
These phrases simply mean that Palestinians should be free from occupation, free from apartheid. And if this is somehow offensive to people, I would really ask them if they have equality phobia. Because if equality is something that offends you, you really need to go get checked and have some self-awareness happening there. And also, I want to say something. We are here debating some words, and we're somehow accused of things that we are not, it's got nothing to do with us. And as Muhammad al-Kurd, who's a Palestinian writer, once said, I am sick of being accused of something I am not guilty of. I honestly want to bring the conversation back to what it matters, and that is the ongoing genocide against Palestinians. Palestinian toddlers, just last week, we have seen an 18-month-old toddler being abducted in daylight by Israeli forces, and they have burned cigarettes on his body just to get a confession out of his dad. What is this? This is terrorism. We've seen Palestinian mothers and Palestinian women being forced to give birth and undergo surgeries with no painkillers. We are still seeing the continued killing and bombing of hospitals and schools. And last week, we've seen that death penalty being passed in the Knesset, where dehumanization first is normalized and then it's legislated. We've seen that death penalty being passed also targeting Palestinians only. I mean, you can't look at this. Anyone with eyes can see the apartheid system. Anyone with eyes can see the genocide that is occurring. And now we're being asked as Palestinians and people standing for equal human rights to watch our words lest they cause offense. This is ridiculous. And this is not going to happen.
Yeah, is there a worry that as the media focus and even the protest activity being organised by Justice for Palestine becomes around these laws locally, that the actual situation in Palestine gets sidelined a bit?
Absolutely. And I think it is our responsibility as activists, as organisers, as advocates for human rights to always bring the conversation back to where it matters. I mean, today is Palestinian Prisoners' Day. There are over 10,000 Palestinians in Israeli prisons. Many thousands of those are there in what they call administrative detention, which means that they're being held with no charge. There are hundreds of Palestinian children in those prisons, and now all of them are facing the risk of being hanged, basically, which was legislated by the Knesset. I mean, it is one thing when we see the actions of illegal settlers who kill and burn down entire villages with no accountability. That is one thing of grave concern, of course, but it is another when it is state policy and when the state itself is legislating the killing and the targeting of one race. This is systemic, and this requires all of us to stand up and use our voices, use every opportunity to be talking about the undermining of international law, which is not serving anyone. Once international law is being undermined, no one is safe, not just Palestinians. No one is safe. And we are still seeing what have been normalized in Palestine over the few years, being rolled out in other countries, including Lebanon, including Iran. All of these violations of international law are now happening with no accountability. In fact, we talk about the war in Iran, the illegality of it as a, as a fringe detail, as if it's not the whole thing, that this is against international law. And this is what we've normalized over the past few years when we have decided to bury our heads in the sand and pretend genocide is not happening. It is our responsibility as advocates for human rights to use every opportunity, including this one, when people are busy talking about some words about, water and freedom. It is our responsibility to say, hang on a second, what really matters right now is to talk about the horrific ongoing genocide against Palestinians, which has not stopped in years. Apartheid Israel continues to blockade food and aid. Apartheid Israel continues to bomb hospitals, continues to bomb schools, and continues to abduct Palestinians in daylight, torture them, and throw them in Israeli prison.
Now, when a parliament introduces a new bill, it is normal for stakeholders to be consulted as part of the process. And obviously, when it comes to this law, the people that are largely affected are Justice for Palestine activists and people that come to the rallies. So I'm just wondering, in the process of bringing in this law, did JFP get contacted by the Queensland state government at all?
So the state government opened up submissions by the public, and the submission time frame was within less than a week, which is very unusual for laws that could impact communities, such as the laws that got passed. So we did make a public submission, and we also expressed interest in being invited to speak at the public hearing. And I was present at the time of the public hearing because this is basically impacting Palestinians directly. This is my culture. This is my community. These are words that are grounded in the history of our struggle. And I was present there, and we were excluded from the public hearing, which is one of the discriminatory natures of this law, that the people who are being targeted in these laws have been entirely excluded from the public hearing process.
That's amazing. I mean, you wouldn't necessarily expect that they would listen to what you had to say, but surely at the very least you would be allowed to speak at the hearing and offer an alternative viewpoint.
Absolutely. This is the expectation from a committee that calls itself integrity and community safety. Well, what integrity do you have as a committee when you are discussing laws targeting a community? Well, Palestinians here in Queensland, more than 1,000 Palestinians live here in Queensland, and you can't pass laws that target this community. Of course, in addition to the thousands and thousands of Muslims who are also being targeted, specifically when we talk about the symbols aspect of this stupid law, and not expect us to push back and be like, well, actually, these are our people. These are our children who are going to be impacted by this. And we were there and we expressed interest and we were proactive about it. And we called them and we said we will be there and we want to be heard. We want this public hearing to be equitable. But we were excluded entirely from this whole process. If the people who are being targeted, Palestinians who are being targeted in this law, are being excluded, we should question the credibility of this committee. We should question the integrity of the entire committee.
I am interested about the two phrases that have been banned, and obviously the one that's gained the most notoriety is the phrase that's about, going from one body of water to another. But the other phrase, which is about the rebellion or intifada being globalised, it seems a bit odd to me because it just doesn't get chanted. I have never once heard anybody chant this phrase at any rally.
That is exactly right. We actually don't chant it. And not because we think it's the wrong thing to say. Not at all. We just don't chant it. We just have other chants and slogans. But what these laws did is that it opened up the opportunity for us to talk about the globalize phrase. I mean, anyone who had ever been to any JFP rallies, if you look at the signs and slogans around you, they're basically signs that say boycott Israel, that say ceasefire, that say things like, like stop the genocide, stop the killing of civilians, and these kind of signs. So even if that chant is present at these protests, anyone with common sense would look at the signs around them and figure out what this means. I mean, when we put this in context and we look at signs that say, boycott sanctions and divestments, ceasefire, etc., it is clear what this means. In our capacity here as Queenslanders, what we can do, we can hold our own government to account. And when we say that globalize chant, the way we hold our government to account as Australians here, people who want to express solidarity globally with an oppressed people, is basically to try and pressure our government to sanction this apartheid regime, is basically to do our own obligation by boycotting Israeli products, is basically to pressure our own companies to divest from companies operating in apartheid Israel. It is clear. I mean, the whole sometimes when I look at these laws and look at the narrative associated with these laws, I honestly think that there is an assumption that people are stupid and can't think for themselves. But the reality is, people are smart. And what we have seen over the past years is something that cannot be unseen and cannot be live streamed on our screens without some resistance from the community.
Well, this weekend there is a weekend of action being organised in resistance to the laws. Can you tell us what that's all about?
Absolutely. So, first of all, we think these laws are absurd. And I'm sure a lot of the listeners know that some houses here in Queensland have been raided, that artists have been raided, that some artwork had been censored. This has gone too far. And these laws need to be struck down in the same way that in New South Wales yesterday we've heard the ruling that the anti-protest laws are unconstitutional. What we're doing here in Queensland is that we want to do in the same way that in the 1970s and the 1980s, people stood together against anti-protest laws, we're going to do the same this year in 2026. And we're going to say to Christopher Foley and his government that Israel and the Israeli lobby cannot dictate what Queenslanders can say and cannot say on our streets, which is why we call this campaign Not Our Law, because they are not compatible with the right to freedom, the right to expression, basic freedoms of expressions and civil liberties. We are going to stand together, and we are going to, tonight, for instance, is a joyful act of resistance. We're going to sing and dance John Farnham's Two Strong Hearts. I think a lot of people have seen the mural in South Brisbane that basically features John Farnham with the phrase that is similar to the band's phrase here in Queensland. We have seen the censorship on Nordacious artwork because there is this quote from the song, which is ridiculous. I mean, we're talking about a song here. This is the absurdity of these laws, that we are being asked to question whether or not we are allowed to sing a 1988 rock classic. This is how stupid these laws are. Tomorrow is basically a day where a lot of people have told us they are going to stand together to challenge the laws. Now, how these people are going to challenge the laws, that's for them to decide. But basically, from what we're going to do from Justice for Palestine is we want to ensure that each single person understands their rights and the consequences of their actions. So I want people to have a really good think before they do anything that challenges these laws in any way. That could be creatively, that could be verbally. I don't know. That's not for me to decide how Queenslanders are going to uphold their freedoms and civil liberties. And Sunday is also another day of mobilization against these laws because, Andy, I'm sure you know, part of our battle is political. And what we do on the streets is some of the most important parts of what we're trying to achieve, which is mobilizing people for a cause that is bigger than all of us. And on Sunday also, we're going to stand in solidarity with Palestinian prisoners who have been thrown and forgotten in Israeli prisons and now facing the risk of a death penalty by hanging. So this is what we're doing over the weekend. We're going to allow the opportunity for thousands of Queenslanders who are outraged by these stupid, absurd laws. We're going to allow the opportunity for these people to come together. Whether people want to challenge these laws up front, whether people want to stand in solidarity with those refusing to be silenced, there is a role for everyone. And I want to reassure the listeners here is that even if you want to, if you decide to go and if you're not planning basically to get arrested, you can be there. And if you don't say any or display any of the banned phrases, there is no risk for you at all. And again, I am not encouraging people to say or display any of the prohibited expressions. It is not for me, however, to decide how Queenslanders want to uphold their freedoms and civil liberties. And we want to ensure that each single person understands, again, their rights and the consequences of these actions. And we're going to have and try and get some support for these people who might be at risk of getting arrested on the day.
It seems like three different elements of a kind of protest movement. Tonight there's the fun and humour, and tomorrow there's a sort of staunch resistance, and on Sunday it's more of a caring for each other, solidarity kind of space.
Absolutely, absolutely. And each one of them serves a purpose, which is part of our own struggle.
All right. Thanks very much, Remah, for chatting with us today.
Thank you, Andy. And thanks so much for the opportunity. I hope to see you tonight or during the weekend sometime.
We were speaking with Remah Naji from Justice for Palestine Magandjin about the new laws brought in Queensland to restrict the speaking of slogans associated with Palestinian protest. Laws that can be resisted, and we have seen this week that the New South Wales anti-protest laws were struck down as unconstitutional, And of course they were unconstitutional. These laws as well, restricting freedom of speech, I think there's a good case to say they are unconstitutional. But governments, they don't really believe in the Constitution. They believe in wielding whatever power they can, whatever they can get away with. And so that law, it was resisted, not just in the court, it was resisted. People got out and kept doing the rallies, and there's people who were arrested and are being charged for going to rallies that were banned under a law that it's said was unconstitutional. And so hopefully there'll be some kind of process to deal with that. But yeah, you can get out and resist laws. Once upon a time, a lot of things that we now consider normal rights of a free person were illegal, and people resisted it in different ways. Of course, there's legal challenges, there's lobbying and all those kind of processes, but there's also resisting out on the streets and resisting in the prison cells if necessary, in the watch house and in the courts. And that is what a couple of people have done. Last week we did speak to Liam Parry, who was arrested for speaking the banned phrases. And this week I've got two interviews with two people. They're both related, and for full disclosure, they're my in-laws actually, and so they're sort of related to me as well. But first we'll speak with Jim Dowling, who was in court this week for his resistance to the new laws. He'll give you all the details. Jim, you were one of the first people who fell foul of the new Queensland hate speech in inverted commas laws. Can you tell us first off what happened? What led to you being arrested?
Well, we've been going to the Boeing head office in Brisbane for the last 2 years to resist their war-making activities. Their making of missiles, fighter planes, attack helicopters, bombs, etc. And we were there in a normal vigil last month, soon after this crazy law was introduced, and I held a banner that said, "From the river to the sea, Brisbane will be free of Boeing." And no mention of anything else. And for that I was arrested. The people in the Boeing office called the police, as they often do. The police don't always come, but they came when this heinous crime was being committed, came and arrested me for holding that sign.
And had you anticipated, obviously the laws had caused a bit of a stir, had you anticipated that you would be arrested for it?
Oh yeah, I was quite prepared for it. I thought I probably would be. Wasn't sure though. I mean, obviously there's no connection between Palestine, Israel or anything like that with my sign. It's just about Boeing. But sure enough, the police did come and arrest me.
And I suppose, part of that you were, doing your usual vigil at Boeing, but also I suppose there was an element of intentional civil disobedience against this new law, was there?
Oh, for sure, yeah. As soon as I heard about it, the law, I thought it was just insane, and as I keep repeating to everyone, and I thought, well, you've got to defy such a ridiculous law, denying everyone the basic right of free speech. I knew I'd have to resist it in some way or another, so I was certainly prepared to get arrested for it. Yeah, I've been arrested for free speech many times, and this was just one more.
Was that back in the Joe years, your previous arrests?
My first arrest was under Joe Bjelke-Petersen in 1978, when Joe banned the right to march. He said there'll be no more marches in Queensland, and thousands of people were arrested at that stage, resisting his law on stopping free speech.
Do you see, parallels with then and now, and maybe with community responses?
Well, it's hard to know. I mean, I think we live in crazy times to which there's no parallel in my 50 years of being involved in community politics. Everything seems very crazy compared to then. As I pointed out, at least it made sense. Joe's law was banning right to march, so there wouldn't be protest against something that he was supporting, which was uranium mining at the time. That was the main thing. Made sense. It's fascist law, but it made sense. But this law of banning the words from the river to the sea and banning the words globalising intifada is just insane. Just one more insane political action in this world, yeah. So similarities in the fact they're both banning simple right of free speech, but in other ways we live in more crazy times today than ever, I think.
And so when you appeared in court this week, I understand you entered a plea of insanity of the state.
Yes, it was pretty funny. The magistrate asked me how I pled, and I said I plead insanity. This law is insane, and anyone who takes it seriously is a bit sus also. Sort of implying her, really. And anyhow, she misunderstood me. She heard the part about pleading insanity. She said, well, you have a right to plead that. Have you sought advice? Have you been to a psychiatrist? And I said, no, it's the law that's insane, not me. And then she said, oh, well, I'll put a day down for hearing then, and just gave me a court date. She didn't even laugh.
Tough audience.
Yeah.
Well, you intend to fight it in court?
Yeah, well, I'll just fight for the same causes I've always been fighting for, against the arms industry, for the right of free speech, and against genocide, which is happening in Gaza, and against war in general. So, I'm not so much interested. As I said, I don't take the law seriously, so I'm not fighting it on legal grounds, but just further expressing my feelings and resistance to war making, etc.
And what do you think? Obviously, in your history and in this instance, you have a particular way of, like, you believe in defying unjust laws, civil disobedience. What do you think is the value of that?
Well, we've got to struggle against injustice and oppression and violence. It's pretty basic to stand up for human rights and be peacemaker. Blessed are the peacemakers, Jesus said. And some people believe that we can achieve peace by violent means. Most people believe that, unfortunately. But I believe in non-violent resistance, and I'm not about to bomb Parliament or shoot people to achieve justice and peace. So, yeah, non-violence is the only path open to me, and this is a form of non-violent resistance to the arms trade and to unjust laws. So it's what I do, and my way of living a life of attempting to achieve more justice and peace in the world. So that's a part of it. Going to court is just part of it.
Here on the Paradigm Shift on 4ZZZ, Jim Dowling, he was protesting out the front of Boeing, holding a sign when he was arrested for speaking the words that must not be said. And Franz Dowling also ran into a bit of legal trouble over those same words, and so let's hear Franz's account of what happened when he dared to put up a sign with the same words. Franz, we're talking today about the Queensland's new hate speech, in inverted commas, laws, which you ran into a little bit of trouble with the laws. I guess, can you start off by giving us a bit of context of what happened?
Yeah, so I live in a house that is called a Catholic Worker House of Hospitality, where we put up refugees and homeless people here, and we're a bit of like a community hub of a space, I guess. And I basically woke up and went on my phone over breakfast, and an article from The Guardian popped up saying that this new law was going to pass and that this phrase would be made illegal in a few days. And I couldn't believe it. I'd kind of heard whispers about it, and so to hear that it was actually happening was pretty shocking. And I straight away told a couple of my housemates, like, hey, I'm going to get a bed sheet and spray paint it, and I'm just going to write, "From the river to the sea, come and get us crucifully" on it. And they thought it was pretty funny. So I just did it then and there, really, in our backyard. And as I did it, I then also told my housemates, like, oh, look, if we do get a knock on the door or whatever happens, I don't know what's going to happen. Like, this is all a bit of an experiment. Then I'll take the fall for it. Like, just tell them it was me, and we'll see what happens. Because, yeah, the law that was coming into place, I was so shocked about. And for me as well, it's like me and my wife live here, and we're expecting a baby. And at that point, it was like in about a month and a bit was our due date. And I wasn't wanting to get in trouble with the law. I had a lot of other things on my mind. But the sudden realization that this was a law that obviously we shouldn't submit to. You know, Martin Luther King Jr. famously said it's our moral obligation to disobey unjust laws. This is obviously a very unjust law, and so easy to not submit to. And so and I also, at that point, I guess I thought it was most likely it would just be ignored. So it was a bit of an experiment, but I put it on the side of our house, this banner, and 5 days later the law came into place, and the first 2 arrests were made outside of Parliament, and that was when it hit me, like, oh, I could actually get charged for this.
You had thought you might get charged, but in the end it was a bit more dramatic than that, wasn't it?
10 days go by, we heard nothing, no knock at the door by police, nothing, and then it was Friday morning, and we were awoken to a whole group of counter-terrorist police. There were 7 of them coming into our house about 7:30. My wife and I were still asleep, and they were banging on all our bedroom doors, screaming, get out of your rooms now. One of my housemates was in the shower, and they yelled at him through the door, if you don't come out, we're going to break the door down. And they shepherded everyone out of their rooms into the lounge room and detained everyone for 2 hours. And it was very hectic, very emotional for some of us. There was a lot of anger on my part, a lot of fear as well from people, a lot of emotions. And I sat there and I just said to them, first thing, what are you guys doing? You can walk away. You don't have to do this. And I told them everything, that it was me. I confessed then and there. I said, this is what I did. But they had a warrant that they were able to seize every single mobile and computer device in the household if they wanted to. And so they told me, if you give us your laptop and phone, we won't take anyone else's. But if you refuse to hand them over, we will take every device in this house. And I argued for a bit, just on the grounds that you have my confession, you know what I did, there's no reason why you need my phone and computer. And the best thing that they could come up with was it could have evidence that someone else was involved in the offence. But in the end, handed over my mobile, my laptop, gave them the passwords, and they left, and they didn't charge me, and they told me they would assess the evidence. But I was left feeling very violated and very upset by the whole thing, and in shock, really. Like, we were expecting a knock on the door. I was expecting a charge by that point, for sure, at some point, but definitely was not expecting that. And in the end, they decided they wouldn't charge me. They gave me a written warning, so it was quite clear they didn't really care about charging me, actually, but for whatever reason wanted my devices and wanted all the data off them, which is now in the police database forever. Yeah.
So in the end, there was no charges or anything?
No charges yet. So just 3 days ago, they made me sign a written warning, and they told me they had decided not to charge me, but that if I spoke this prohibited expression again or wrote it down again, that I would be charged.
So obviously you considered that it was important to publicly kind of defy the law. Why was that important to you?
Yeah, I think it's very important to me because I guess we're in a time where it seems like this could easily be an extremely slippery slope. Like, this is already, these laws have passed that are such a horrific abuse of our freedom of expression, of our freedom of speech. It's literally written, the law is written as stating or displaying a prohibited expression, and that's pretty terrifying. And I guess just knowing history, we know that this is how horrible periods of fascism begin. This is how, it starts with this kind of fear-based stopping of freedom of speech. And the other thing is, this is a law that is very, very, very easy to fight, very easy to break. And I guess I live my life under the ideal of, if there is an unjust law, we should be breaking it. We shouldn't be submitting to it. And this is a very easy time to do that. And so for those of us who are in a place where we are able to, I think that's what we should be doing. Yeah.
The phrase itself, what does that mean to you?
Yeah, so I've been involved in Free Palestine stuff since, I don't know, my whole adult life, really, probably going on 10 years on and off. And I've always known that expression to mean a call for peace and a call for freedom of a group of people who have lived for a long time in horrible, horrible conditions, suffering under colonial violence. And I myself am a non-violent activist. I have a philosophy of non-violence, and I think that's definitely what the phrase means to me. Palestine shall be free is how I've always heard it stated. And so, yeah, banning that under the idea that it incites violence is just absolutely mind-boggling for me.
4ZZZ is the station that you are listening to, and that interview we just heard was with Franz Dowling talking about his house being raided, everybody being detained in the one room, all the housemates, while they did a total search of the whole house, and his electronic devices confiscated for displaying a banner with prohibited words on it. And this is where we're at right now. Dawn raids by the terrorist squad, restricting freedom of speech all over a couple of expressions that, it's not related to, I guess, our physical situation. There's so much going on in the world, but these expressions are what the government has chosen to take on in an all-out assault. But there will be people resisting it. It's a weekend of action, as Remah was saying. On social media, it's caused a big sensation, actually, the flash mob. And I did see some very smart aleck people posting, it's not even exactly the same phrase, as if, it's some magic spell that happens when you say these words. It's it just shows how much we've kind of dissolved into bizarre, abstract politics. We're spending too much time on the internet, We've lost touch with reality. It's just a catchy slogan that rhymes, but it's talking about some people's freedom in a place where they don't have much. But anyway, it's a struggle that we're in. And I'll be back on the Paradigm Shift next week. See you then.